Good day to you. We haven't done one of these for a while, but I wanted to sort of catch up with everybody. We resisted the temptation to do a webinar when the original consultation document came out for the border operating model, because it was just that. It was a consultation document, and our style is very much to actually advise people what they need to do now, what they need to prepare for. And of course, nothing was set in stone at that time, and it has already changed quite, I was going to say significantly, but we'll examine that as we go through. But now we do have the border target operating model. Let's call it the border operating model for ease of reference. We do now have that. We've digested the information in there. We also have the Windsor framework in the background. We have labelling requirements in the background. We have safety and security declaration changes in EU. We have safety and security declaration coming into the UK. So we thought this was probably about time to get back on the horse, really, and hope we've not lost our mojo, because we haven't done one for quite some time. So as usual, these could probably be more polished, but I'm more interested in content than I am in presentation. So hopefully you'll excuse me if there's any sort of quirky bits, particularly when I stop the recording at the end, where you're probably just going to see me flapping around a bit. But anyway, so let's crack on. By going the right way, it would help. So first of all, a bit of a warning. I'm going to use a lot of acronyms. I'm sorry that I do. Hopefully I'll try and explain them as I go, but they're kind of in the DNA of a customs agent. So we tend to use them just like we use normal words. So excuse me if I don't explain any on the way. If you can keep up with them, give yourself a big fat round of applause, because there are quite a lot of them. So before we start talking about the border operating model, let's just have a look at today. And the EU flows from EU to GB, they won't get any easier or cheaper than they are right now. Okay, so if you're not finding things very smooth at the moment and very cost effective at the moment, you're in for a world of pain next year onwards, really. Only because you've suddenly got a safety and security declaration, you've got SPS controls if you're bringing in products of animal origin. So generally speaking, it's about as simple as it can get right now, and it's about to get a little bit more complicated. Don't waste time. I know the border operating model's sort of been kicked down the road a little bit until the 1st of January, it's sort of a 3-month delay. That doesn't mean you've got 3 months to do nothing. It means you've got 3 months to prepare for it. So the worst thing you can do is nothing at all. What do I mean by it's easier than it is today than it's ever been, or that it will be going forward? Not that it's ever been, because of course, when we were all part of one big federal state, if you like, things were moved quite smoothly anyway. But that of course limited our growth. So what you have at the moment is easy left, hard right. You've got the rest of the world was always costly and cumbersome compared to EU flows, which were free flowing. So there is no bar of how complicated that is. It was like domestic transport, if you like, or domestic movement of goods. Then Brexit came along and things got slightly harder. And a lot of people saw that as more of the same. Well, it's not. It's actually the flows on ro-ro cannot be really compared to maritime or air. They're very different. And if you're using air or maritime solutions for ro-ro traffic, with great respect, you're doing it wrong. So EU became complicated and a bit more difficult. And when we hear people saying, well, it's just more of the same, it clearly isn't, because it wasn't as hard. It still wasn't as hard as rest of world because of the SPS controls, safety and security declarations, and so on and so forth. So when you add them to the frame, now flows from rest of world and flows from EU to GB are the same. Only our argument is EU's worse. And the reason why we say it's worse is that the rest of world flows, being particularly maritime, for example, have some advantages. One is you've got time. Secondly, you've got aggregation. So if you have 10 containers on one vessel, it's one customs documentation, one customs entry. Whereas at the moment, if you have 10 trucks coming from Lille, it's 10 customs declarations. Plus, it's largely an arrival model, so you can set off without the import declaration being done. And if slow boat from China, you've got 6 weeks to get it done. If you set off from Lille, you've got to have the customs declaration in place by the time you hit Calais. So if anything, I think rest of world after the border operating model becomes slightly easier than EU GB in comparison. But that's only if you treat it as more of the same. Okay, so we see a lot of this situation at the moment where people are saying, that's okay, it's working, we haven't got time to look at anything, everything's working fine. Yes, it is, but it is, to show the picture, it is a square wheel when there are round wheels available. So the cart might be moving, but it's not moving smoothly. HMRC and HMG have put in a number of simplifications, simplified import clearances, the decoupling of the frontier process so that you can have a record at the frontier and an entry as customs declaration later. More time to submit the customs declaration. You've got until the 10th calendar day of the second month. We're not in that 175-day deferred entry scheme anymore. This is CFSP, or lovingly known now as SCDP. But excuse me if I keep calling it CFSP, Customs Freight Simplified Procedures, Simplified Customs Declaration Procedure. There, I've explained an acronym. You've got aggregation, so you can do fewer import entries. Flows from EU to GB are very repetitive. And if they are very repetitive, you don't need a declaration for every truck. You can do a declaration at the end of the month for all of the trucks. So when you have that 10 containers on one vessel equals one declaration, 10 trucks from Lille can be one declaration too. If you're not doing it that way, or exploring how you can do it that way, then talk to us because we can help explain it to you. Postponed VAT accounting, that was introduced. I can't remember exactly when, but it was a kind of a reaction to Brexit. Really, is that the government didn't want anybody to take a hit on the cash flow by paying import VAT at the point of importation. So they reintroduced, because it was originally there years ago, postponed VAT accounting. Which meant that you don't have to pay the import VAT at the point of importation. You merely account for it, and when you do your tax, your VAT return, your income tax VAT, when you do your VAT return at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter, you simultaneously pay and reclaim the VAT. So huge cash flow advantage. We see some people not taking advantage of that. Must have too much cash. That's what I can say. Or there are some goods, some traders that don't qualify for postponed VAT accounting. But not many, but yet we see a lot that do qualify still not using postponed VAT accounting, presumably because they've got too much cash. A lot of people have said, well, it's because it's a different process, but it isn't. The evidence you have for your input tax return is exactly the evidence you will use in the postponed VAT accounting process. So DDA, duty deferment account, for improved cash flow. These used to be fairly cumbersome to obtain because you needed bank guarantees of double the amount you needed every month, blah, blah, blah. But any duty that you pay at the frontier is not actually payable until you account for it at the frontier, and then you pay it by the 15th of the following month, unless it's excise duty, in which case there are 2 payments in the month. But generally speaking, for ad valorem duty, just customs duty, you can actually gain an account with customs where you can get up to 45 days credit on the duty. As I say, that used to be quite cumbersome because of bank guarantees required and so on and so forth. But again, HMRC put in a relaxation on that and actually said, look, you can have providing you're an upstanding company, you can have a duty deferment account up to £10,000 a month. So you can have a credit account with HMRC for £10,000 a month for no guarantee at all. It's 100% waiver on the guarantee process. So it's easy to apply for, easy to get, and cost you nothing, and you get a maximum of 45 days credit. There's also simplified export transit processes where you can actually authenticate the transit at the authorised consignor location. You can have as many authorised consignor locations as you can. So if you're currently running into an IBF at Sevington or Holyhead or something like that to authenticate your transit, there's a better way. Okay. These simplifications have always been there. They were even quite unusually, and I've never heard this before, they were referred to in the budget. Normally, in the last budget, normally the budget talks about increased duty on beer, wine, and fags, and so on and so forth. But this one actually talks about customs simplification. Proof of that is that you've now got until the 10th calendar day of the second month to do your import declaration, whereas prior to that was the 4th working day. So, big moves in the right direction. Make sure you're claiming all of these simplifications. What we've done with Cabbie is harness those simplifications and made access to them as simple as we possibly can. So where the simplifications have taken it from being hard towards medium, we've now taken it from medium towards easy. So that we have access to all of those simplifications. We use them every day of the week, thousands of times. And what we've done with Cabbie, which is Customs and Borders Import Export, which is I'll explain it a bit more in a minute, is access to that process so that you can also gain those advantages. So just to recap, it's about to get a bit harder for EU to GB. So make sure it isn't hard today, because if it's hard today, you're going to find it a lot harder next year. Basically, make sure you're claiming all of your benefits, because some of them are going to become a bit more complicated. One of the first things we have to always say to people is that choose where the process takes place. So in this common sort of scenario where you've got a a seller on the left-hand side under a DAP, a delivered price. So he's selling goods delivered to the consignee, or the importer in this case. There is a frontier in the middle depicted here by the vessel. The customs clearance, although the goods are delivered to the customer can't get them unless he actually does a customs declaration before the frontier, if in GVMS world, which is normally how Ro-Ro moves. So suddenly the importer who's bought the goods, including the delivery, now has to do something in order to actually get those goods. You don't have to do it that way. It's the way that it happens a lot, but actually that declaration can be done after the event. You create a record at the frontier here, not a declaration, just a record, and you do the actual customs declaration afterwards. And of course, because of aggregation, that can be fewer customs declarations anyway. So that takes 5 minutes to create. There's no delay, nothing gets held up, and then the actual declaration can be done later on. Okay, so we hear a lot of people, because one of the problems here as well on DAP is that the importer who, in the old process of doing the declaration there, is charged with the responsibility of trying to get the information to the trucking company, who he has no relationship with because the price is delivered. So don't do it. Just create a record, let everything pass through the frontier, do the admin later. Don't let the customs process interfere with the supply chain, because it doesn't need to. And if it currently is, with greatest respect, that's your choice. It doesn't have to be that way. So if your supply chain is being in any way affected by the customs process is probably wrong. If you take the other scenario where the goods are actually FCA, if you like, or the buyer collects rather than the seller delivers, again, you've got the buyer is more in control because he has a relationship with the trucking company, but and he can now choose whether he wants to do the customs declaration at the frontier or do it later on with the record. Just let it pass through the frontier super quick. Bearing in mind, Lille to Calais is not far, for example. How fast can you get that declaration done? And why do it? Why stress the frontier when you can actually just create a record that allows the goods to come into GB, and that record is an irrevocable undertaking to do the declaration by the 10th day of the following month? That's a lot easier than holding a truck up in Calais waiting for a GMR, for example. So think about it. Think about not only what is the process, am I paying the right amount of money for the process? Have I got the right process? And am I doing the process at the right place? The biggest strength we have in any of our structures is lining the ducks up in the right order. All of the processes exist, and whether you customs clear at the frontier or you customs clear later, they're the same component elements. All we've done is line them up differently so the supply chain is unaffected by the process. We have logistics companies that we work with closely who have actually a member of staff, or in some cases more than one member of staff, in their office who chase MRNs. It's a ludicrous situation. So we have a speedy groupage here in our example. They've got an import consignment for a customer. It's a DAP, for example. So the speedy freight speedy groupage is being paid by the seller. They've rung the consignee to say there's something on its way. The consignee has said, okay, I have my own customs agent. I'll get on to them straight away. But the customs agent's got a lot to do if you're doing full frontier declarations. There's lots of peak points, lots of peaks, lots of peaks of flow, So it's going to take him couple of hours in a lot of cases. I mean, there are some that are quicker, there are some that are slower, there are some that open at night, there's some that don't open at night, there's some that open at weekend, there's some that don't open at weekend. So all of those kind of complications come in. So you end up in a situation where speedy groupage here, the time is ticking away and they're still not able to get the GMR details, the import movement reference of the import declaration done by the agent on behalf of the importer in order to complete the GMR, the goods movement reference that would allow them to board the ferry in Calais. Whew, that was a long sentence. This happens an awful lot and it shouldn't need to happen at all. Time just passes in this situation. Trucking companies end up getting frustrated. It costs £1 a minute. I know I've said that a million times, but it costs £1 a minute to delay a truck in its working time. And particularly when you're delaying it without any real reason other than process, then fix it. By having Cabbie, one of the reasons why I introduced Cabbie is fast to register and fast to upload a transaction. So you can register with Cabbie within 20 minutes. Okay, you only register once, and once you're on, you're on. You then just upload the documents to Cabbie sufficiently so that we can create a record that allows us to release the consignment. We immediately give you a movement reference number for those goods. It's actually our EORI number because it's an approved EORI number, and that can be added to the GMR and everything can go. So 1 and 2 can suck up 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. 3 and 4, once you've registered, 3 and 4, less than 5 minutes. And suddenly you've got the goods are flowing smoothly. The carrier's not under pressure. Your seller is not under pressure from the carrier saying, I'm stuck in Calais waiting for your buyer. There are many, many better ways of doing it, and MRN hunting should not exist. But the tagline we came up with really for Cabbie was click, click, cleared, because it is 9 clicks. Once you're registered on Cabbie and we've gone through the due diligence that we trust you enough to give you access to our approvals, it takes 9 clicks to actually release an import consignment from scratch. We do demos on this for people, and the demo is a minute. It just takes a minute. It's only slow when somebody asks a question, but chances are it's answered on the next screen. But from start to stop is normally it's about just over a minute, 10 seconds, something like that, to fully release an import consignment. So we've gone with total simplification. There's less risk or process at the frontier. So if there's less process, there's less risk. There's less paperwork afterwards because we can use aggregation. You have direct access to our top tier customs approvals, which is CFSP, EIDR with full aggregation. EIDR is entry in declarant's records. We're the declarant in this case. There's 170 of us sitting in the background to make sure nothing gets stuck. And those people, not all 170 of them, because they'd be tired, working 24/7. So there is no, we even work Christmas Day. So there is no gap in our service. And you've always got access to first-rate customs advice and support, no matter what the time of day or day of the week. It's faster customs processing. I can't get better than 9 clicks. In actual fact, it's about 7. One of them's a confirmation screen, and one of them's a confirm screen. So it's actually, you can actually do it in 7 clicks. Why wouldn't you try it? It doesn't cost anything to have Cabbie. It's not software, so you don't need any licenses or anything like that. We just give you access to it through our portal. There's no cost to register, and there's no cost to actually have a white label. If you wanted to have a white label because you are a freight forwarder or a customs agent or a consultant, maybe. So there's no cost to it at all. It's actually free to have, and you only use it. You only pay for it when you use it, which is when you put a consignment through it, which allows us to create a record to release the goods, and then we do the declaration later on. I promise I will get to the border operating model in a minute, but I can't miss this opportunity. It's also significantly cheaper than traditional port clearance. I'm not going to tacky this by talking about pricing, but it is. It's plug and play customs platform, sits in the cloud, and it's ready to go. There's a click here part for the demo. This will be available when we put the PDF online. Okay, so what is Cabbie? Because one of our sales guys asked me the other day, and I thought, oh, that's a good question, because we all know what it is. We've watched it grow, you know. But to the trader, it's a fully compliant supply chain process that shifts customs clearance from the border to the back office. Big point. So you don't end up holding vehicles up at the frontier. You shifted all of it into admin. This is allowing the goods to pass through the frontier without unnecessary friction. You have the option to reduce the friction. Some people always say to me, well, we don't really have that many problems. Well, of course you don't until you do. That's like not having insurance. You know, I don't have insurance because I don't have many accidents. Until you do, and then when you do, what are you going to do about it? So Cabbie sits in the background as an insurance. It's not looking to replace anything you currently do. It's just giving you another layer of security and comfort. So the white label partner, which is typically, as I say, a freight forwarder, a customs agent, or even a consultant, it allows the customs it's a customs process that allows you to offer or upscale your own customs service without risk, liability, or long-term commitment, whilst generating a revenue stream at the same time. Cabbie is not software. It's a secure portal to our customs approvals. It gives you access to our expertise, simplification, streamlining, and a 24-hour team of experts. We've seen a lot of, since Brexit, we've seen a lot of people coming along with solutions, looking for a problem. We're more down to earth than that, more practical. So we've looked at the problem and written a solution. It's taken a bit of time. It's taken a lot of money. But it's now super slick, well tested. We use it internally for our movements. We have done for 18 months, and if there are any rough spots, they've been well and truly ironed out by now. Cabbie allows us to actually fulfill what we consider to be our role in this process, which is to facilitate trade by managing the risks, the associated risks, liabilities, and the resourcing required. Our job is not to react to trade. and just wait for traders to actually do something, and then we'll say, oh, if you need a customs declaration, I'm there for you. It's actually to go out of there and make it easier for all of this to happen, so that you're more inclined to trade more, because it's about as simple as it can be. What do customers say about us, or what does the market say about us? Well, first of all, we get EORI. We did some EORI. You do a brilliant job. We forgot you were there. That's to us position A. We did some customer surveys recently, ringing GB importers, asking them what they thought of our service, because we have these flows up from Paris of food products, and they forgot we were there. We just get on with it. The data feed comes from the agent in Paris. Everything passes through on simplification at the frontier, so nothing gets delayed, and the declaration gets done later on and sent through to the client along with our invoice for the declarations we've done. They hardly see us. Position A for us. Some of the carriers have actually gone, because they know they can get stuck in this MRN hunting scenario. So they've actually said that they won't carry it unless EORI are clearing it. That wasn't us hoodwinking anybody or capturing freight, as we were accused of by somebody at one point. It's actually us just giving access to our simplification so freight can keep moving. From the haulier's point of view, who's operating groupage, why would I carry 50% of my goods go through super fast, the other 50% slow it down and taint the service I'm giving on the other 50? So the carrier just said, no, I'm not prepared to do that. I'm not prepared to have the service I provide is only as good as the weakest link in the process. Well, then let's strengthen the link. So it works very well. It's cheaper and easier. What's not to like? It is cheaper than traditional customs clearance, significantly cheaper. We've said this a few times, and we actually have it on our literature, that it can be as cheap as £1 a pallet. It can be less in some cases, and it's much easier to use, and it's much less risk at the frontier. So it's well worth checking out. Amazing delivery today, paperwork tomorrow. How can you not like that? Everything just flows. Paperwork gets done the next day. It's not this 6 months later where I've forgotten what I ordered and all this kind of thing. Those days have gone. This is just, why do a full frontier declaration while the goods are moving when I can let it pass through the frontier and do the declaration 5 days later? Why would you not do that? Is it legal? We have got that question asked by somebody, because it's so revolutionary that people just think it wasn't possible. Look, we don't sit there reading customs guidance to work out whether things are possible or not. We know what's possible. We use the guidance just to confirm our suspicions, but we're not pouring through it looking for opportunities. We know what they are. Yeah, me personally, I have 40 years experience in this role, and when Brexit came along, I remember thinking, oh, brilliant, I can go back to doing the job I loved, which was customs clearance. And then I realized I hated it because it was cumbersome, lumpy, things got stuck at the frontier, truck drivers were shouting, truck drivers were unhappy, paperwork. So we said, okay, I like the concept, let's change it. And recently we ran it past some very important people at Multimodal, and one of the best responses I think I heard was I just love it. You guys have reimagined customs clearance. It's completely compliant. It's built on years of experience, years of practical experience. My own personal side, I would say, is 40 years at this, but also I've run trucks, I've run a customs terminal, I've run ferry companies, I've been commercial for Eurotunnel Plus, which was a specialist freight division. I get it. You know, Europe is our sweet spot and our comfort zone, really. Maritime's fine too, air's fine too, but these weren't broken. Brexit came along and had 140,000 traders this was new to them, so they needed help, and here we are. We did an NPS score recently, or an NPS survey, which is the Net Promoter Score. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's just how likely are you to recommend, and we scored 62. Anything over 30 is thought to be very, very good. 62 is the same level as Amazon, so we're super chuffed with that performance. Right, enough about us. Let's talk about border operating model and things. Customs is changing. Suck that for a minute while I have a quick sip of water. It's changing a lot, actually. There's loads of changes in Europe, as well as the changes in the UK, of course. But we tend to look at the UK ones and think, oh, how are we going to cope with this? And completely forget about the European ones. We've got the border target operating model. It's a catchy title. And the EU have got their customs reforms. We're going to go through the border operating model in a bit of detail in a minute. The EU customs reforms one, the one thing that jumps out of there is the €150 minimum low value declaration. They've got their eyes on that one. They don't like it. Under €150, there's no duty on the goods, and you can do a simplified declaration. There's an awful lot of shipments now moving at under €150. So they've got their eyes on that one. It might not be till 2025, but they've certainly got that in their sights. Let's look at the border operating model for a minute. What's good and what's bad about it? So when we had a quick look, we're always talking about, this is why it always infuriates us when people say Brexit's more of the same, it's just like rest of the world. I mean, okay, but only temporarily. It had to be that way. It's like decorating your lounge. If you're going to take the wallpaper off, it looks worse first before it can look better. That's where we are in Brexit at the moment, where it looks slightly worse before it can look better. So bear in mind that the processes were then sort of mirroring the rest of the world. Once you've got this critical mass, you can then start to look at simplifications and make the whole thing easier. So at the moment, with the border operating model, whatever you want to call it, what's good? Well, if you're importing pizzas from America, it's going to get easier because there's going to be relaxation on composite goods. Not yet, but it's coming. If you import bacon, for example, from Ireland, it's going to get a bit tougher. It's going to get tougher from January and a bit tougher thereafter when the border control posts open, although West Coast is not until October. And if you import car parts from France, not much really, pretty much the same, although there will be a safety and security declaration from October next year, which will mean that your carrier who's responsible for doing the safety and security declaration will have some data challenges as to where does he get the data for that. So there are goods, there are good things, there are bad things, if you like, if you want to use that terminology, and there are things that don't really change much at all, but they do change. Okay. As I say, we resisted the 23rd of April rush to webinar kind of thing. Everyone was punting out webinars about the consultation document, but it was a consultation document. Apart from the fact that it had one line in it that says it is our firm intention to proceed with the first milestone on the 31st of October, which was the SPS controls on products of animal origin. So it's a bit hard for it to be a consultation document if the first milestone is already decided. That was going to be full export health certificates, the introduction of health certification on imports of medium risk products, plant products, and high risk food and feed of non-animal origin. Whew. That was coming on the 31st of October, like next month. Customs then held a lot of consultations. There were an awful lot of questions. There were a lot of people from Europe on these webinars and calls, and they listened. I mean, it's not a weakness. They listened. They had set out the stall of what they wanted to achieve. They listened to the market. I was asked once at one of the select committee presentations that I did was that, are we ready for export health certificates? I said, well, why asking me? You need to ask 27 member states. And that's what happened here. When they said we're going to have export health certificates, the number of EU suppliers that were on those calls or on those webinars was higher than I've ever seen before. So they listened and they postponed it. Not cancelled it. I never thought they would. They've also kept the framework, but they have said, well, we're going to make life a little bit easier. We're going to reclassify SPS, for example. The biggest one in there was health certs, and the biggest one in there was health certs for medium risk goods. High risk has always had health certs. Low risk has never had health certs. And medium risk did not have, or does not currently have, health certs from EU. This is. So the biggest change would be exactly that. Medium risk goods from EU would suddenly require health certification, and they said, no, we're postponing that now. We're keeping the framework, but we're going to classify more goods as low rather than medium. I'll come to that in a minute. So then the document was published. I've never seen so many people posting a hyperlink. People in our industry saying that border operating model's out, here's the hyperlink to it, and then maybe a bit of text, or a lot of people emailing out, here's a link to the border operating model. It's 140 pages. And we are customs professionals who understand this stuff. A lot of cases, traders don't understand it. And to actually send them a document for 140 pages with granular detail in it, it's like going to a restaurant for a meal and the chef coming out and putting the ingredients on your table with a knife and a pan and saying, crack on. You've gone there for a meal. You've gone there to work with a professional who can do what you can't do, or don't want to do, or haven't got time to do, or you've got different priorities. So we absolutely resisted this temptation to send a hyperlink because, quite honestly, Google's pretty good at that thing all on its own. Okay? What we did instead is we took the absolute essential component parts, categorized them into, for example, all exports, American, Irish flows, imports, labeling, NI, SPS conditions. What is the element that you need to worry about or be concerned about? And when does it apply from, and when does it apply to? and we've come up with 140 pages on a page, which is this. So this will be available on our download section. It's free to have. It's if you want to reproduce it, reproduce it. It's got our Cabbie releases in there as well, because we have to get some payback here. We wrote this, took us ages. But instead of us passing you the hyperlink for 140 pages for you to pick the bones out of it, we've actually given you the abridged version in one page. Okay? So quite proud of the work we did there. In fact, super proud of the work we did there. What we've also done is looked at what is required. So excuse all the acronyms on the left-hand side of EAD, XSE. That's an export accompanying document, an exit safety and security declaration, an import safety and security declaration, an import declaration, blah, blah, blah. But what are they? What are the component parts of moving goods across the frontier? And according to the flow, GB&I, IEGB, blah, 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 what's required? Because we found a lot of cases when looking at people, what traders were paying for certain documents. Some were overpaying, some were paying about the market rate, but too many documents. So they were paying for documents they didn't require. Excuse me. It's hot in here. Anyway, but put the jacket on so it'll look a bit more professional. Go with the flow. So that's going to be available to everybody as well as the border operating model on a page. Right, let's look at the risk categories, because I wrote this slide in April when the first list came out. And I was really looking forward to changing this. And I thought this was the slide I really got to change because of the risk categories on products of animal origin. High hasn't changed, low hasn't changed. And to be fair, medium hasn't changed. So at the moment, I'm looking at the border operating model, which has got relaxed SPS controls. And I'm finding quite a disjoin between HMRC's version of that and DEFRA's version of that. We have spoken to DEFRA about this, and they said, well, there's time yet, we're working on it. But at the moment, I'm not confident, and you need to be confident as well, that the products you're bringing in, unless they're classified as low, you're going to need an export health certificate from the 1st of January. Sorry, that's not true. You're going to need an yes, you are. I'm sorry, 1st of January, you're going to need a health certificate. So you don't want your products to be listed as medium. So what are those products at the moment? Medium products, as it stands, are meat, raw, red or white, poultry and beef, for example. Eggs, some certain fishery products, raw milk, ABP, animal byproducts for pet food, infant formula, animal fats, untreated hides. Yuck, yuck, yuck. You don't want to be in that category. You'd much rather be in this category, which is, this is really hard to say. Shelf, I've put self-stable, it should be shelf-stable ambient products of animal origin, excuse the missing H. Composite goods, pasteurized dairy, wild caught fish, processed pet food, and treated hides are low risk, so you won't require really any change next year under the border operating model. However, there's also a list within the border operating model that leads you to DEFRA, which leads you to the categorization of those products. So you really need to check what's medium and what's low. And when you open the list and you check by commodity code, the left-hand column, which is the one you're really, really interested in to see whether you're medium or low, says medium or low, meaning you just wasted about 10 minutes of your life because the clarification you were after isn't there. This is what we raise to DEFRA and say, don't give me a list saying medium or low when I'm actually looking at the list to see whether I'm medium or low. So, apologies on behalf of DEFRA on that one, really, because you need clarity and it's not there. So, but start to make sure you've got all your commodity codes racked up, and then let's look at whether you are going to be medium or low going forward. In some cases, it's because the commodity code is a kind of a catch-all, and therefore it could be medium or low. But in some of those descriptions you can see there on that screen, they're pretty accurate. They're pretty much actually define the product, and therefore you should be able to define whether it's a medium or low risk. Before you sit there and say, or whether it's self-stable, how could I have missed the H? Never mind. Before you sit there and say, well, hang on a minute, it might be medium from rest of the world and low from the EU, because that's pretty much what some of the release said. That the link to this document on through HMRC, through and the DEFRA's control document states quite clearly in the heading that this list that you're looking at on this screen is for imports from the EU. So, okay, we've highlighted it's the imports from the EU. I'm still sitting there still not knowing whether it's medium or low. So watch this space. If in doubt, it's medium. Start to plan for medium, unless you are clearly on the right-hand side. But do check your commodity codes. If you need that link, then just message us and we'll get that link to you. It was buried in the border operate model. If you have medium goods or you have high-risk goods, then you're going to have some form of inspections to take place. It won't be high numbers. It will always be, flow over control in a lot of cases initially, and those numbers will get more and more, maybe stronger, depending on. Well, it's a matter of reacting to risk. So if there's a salmonella outbreak, you'll get more check on eggs and so on and so forth. On plants, there was a process. Sorry, go back a bit. The HMRC are very keen on developing trusted trader programs, and rightly so. HMRC are not there to get in the way, or any of the border agencies are not in the way to get it. Are not there to get in the way of legitimate trade. They're there to prevent illegitimate trade. So if you have a regular flow of legitimate trade, there should be some way of recognizing that and softening the inconvenience that might be related to it. So trusted trader comes in, really, not AEO, a bit more than that. So for plants, they're talking about authorized operator status, AOS. And for SPS goods, it's a TTS, accredited trusted trader scheme for animal products, which is a pilot, that one, to be fair. And both are saying that if you're a trusted trader, you could carry out these checks at your premises. So the border control post could actually be your premises, because your premises are probably more geared up for your products. As we understand it today, they also have to have a customs approval attached to the border control post. It can't just be a standalone border control post for plants or for animal products. They also have to be a customs point, which means they require temporary storage facility status. That can be something called ACTS, which is the authorized consignee temporary storage status, which is a kind of diet version of temporary storage, which allows the goods to be stored in limbo for up to 6 days, I think, whereas a full fat temporary storage facility is 90 days. ACTS is a relatively easy application, and we can help with that if anybody's stuck. We've done a number of those already. Within our kind of estate, we already have 4 temporary storage facilities, and we have about 16 ACTS locations. So we've done that because it's our job to load the bases to see what's coming next, and I'm quite happy that we've loaded them correctly. So now we're going to apply for these other statuses. If you don't have this status and you actually go to a border control post to have the goods inspected because the driver has been alerted to the fact that he has to go to a border control post for these goods, it won't be free. The consultation document which HMRC have done have said that the cost will be a sort of common usage charge is the original kind of solution to the problem. So a common usage charge of £20 to £43 per consignment. It's not nothing. Okay? That's quite a big range as well, actually, 20 to 43, but whatever. You don't have to pay that if you're doing the examinations at your own location, or you're trusted enough to do the examinations rather than have a sort of government-run border control post. The driver comms is important because we switched to. We work closely with logistics operators, so we're not just here sitting as a customs agent looking after traders. We look after logistics operators as well. And right now, I don't like it. Is that if you've got a frontier declaration, the IPAFs, the sort of alert document, and will be attached to the import declaration, and the import declaration will be attached to the GMR, so it's the hip bone connected to the thigh bone and stuff. And if there is a request for a physical examination on the goods listed on the customs entry, because it has the control sitting underneath it, then the driver will be notified via the GMR process, which is similar to today, and they're quite okay with that. If they are going through an inventory link port, then they'll be notified via the inventory link process, because they won't be able to leave. And when they won't be able to leave, what's holding me up? And you've got to go to the BCP to be checked. But bear in mind, if you have goods which require a BCP, even potentially require a BCP, you must bring those goods in through a port that has the relevant BCP. I know Dover and Eurotunnel don't, but Sevington is the BCP in this case, although right now it's not, but it will be. So you can't just bring it into any old port. Once you realise that there are controls, it's your job to make sure you're bringing the goods in through the port that has those controls. And the other one is IPAF's messaging. So when there isn't an import declaration on the GMR, for example, Well, it wouldn't be, even on our simplifications, we do a simplified frontier declaration, so there'll still be an import MRN. The only time really when you wouldn't have an import declaration on the GMR would be when you're in transit, for example, land bridge transit or transit inland for clearance in the UK, in which case the driver will be informed through IPAF's messaging. See, I already don't like this because the GMR is done by the carrier and IPAFs is often done by the customs agent or the trader. So now the trader is getting a notification to say that the driver has to go to Sevington to be examined, and the trader went home 4 hours ago. So we're not liking this. We're seeing what we can do to fix it. Whether or not we can bring in a mechanism, although CNS did this with beams, where, for example, where you can sort of pull in the data into one location, and we use beams ourselves. So it's worked very well for us, and we just get all the data in one source. One location rather, multiple sources. So we're not happy about that, but we're working on it. Okay. Ireland. It's warm in here. Ireland used to, when Brexit first started in 2021, there was something called the deferred entry scheme, where you had up to 175 days to do a customs declaration. You didn't have to take a whole 175 days, but the point is you didn't have to do it at the frontier. We saw a lot of agents talking about, well, we do full frontier declarations, but that's kind of impossible because there wasn't a frontier at all. It was just a declaration within 175 days, and you were doing it quite quickly. Most didn't actually know where the goods are, and neither did we, because there was no border process to actually say where the goods were. Ireland still is on deferred entry scheme, largely because of we didn't want to, or the UK government didn't want to delay anything coming from Northern Ireland through the Republic of Ireland into Holyhead, and not being able to recognise that it actually come from NI rather than IE. And the last thing we want to do is hold up any goods from NI coming into GB through the as it's against the unfettered access rules. So Ireland kind of was pushed back a little bit, so we'll look at that one later on. It's a very isolated situation. It's all West Coast. It is what it is. Not anymore. In the border operating model, Ireland will require a GMR, so therefore will require a frontier declaration. Anyone who's involved with Ireland will know exactly how that works because of the PBN, the pre-boarding notification, which exists today. The UK equivalent of that is the GMR, and that will be valid from January. Okay. So Ireland not excluded anymore. This relates to imports from all of EU. Ireland not excluded this time. It does not include flows from NI to GB via IE. They'll be able to flow providing they're qualifying goods. The deferred entry scheme, where you actually had up to 175 days, even if you didn't take 175 days, you had up to 175 days. That's finishing in January. There will now be a GVMS required before departure from Dublin, for example, rather like you require a PBN when you're going into Ireland. You can't board the ferry in Holyhead without the PBN, the pre-boarding notification, and all the entry information underneath it. There will be IPAFs for SPS goods. So the IPAFs is like the UK version of traces. So there will be an IPAFs declaration for SPS goods, which right now there isn't. There is on EU flows today, but on Ireland there will be from January. And you will require an export health certificate for medium and high risk products. So again, check that list, see whether you don't want to be high. I mean, the chance of being high, it'd be pretty live animals mostly, but you don't want to be medium. If the benefit of the border operating model, I can't tell you what that is. I can only tell you that it's a lot better if you're low. So, and if you categorize your goods and then get DEFRA to confirm whether you're medium or low, you'll know whether or not you know what the rest of next year is going to look like. If they come back as medium, you've got a bit of an uphill struggle where you need export health certificates. The good news is Cabbie's been sitting in the background, designed for EU GB flows all day long, but we haven't used it on Ireland because it doesn't really work with the deferred entry scheme, because that was kind of yesterday's news. So Cabbie is sitting there and ready to go. And it might also be an opportune time to tell you that we were recently awarded best-in-class customs brokerage by the All Ireland Business Foundation for 2023 for the work we've done in customs clearance in Ireland and in GB. So Cabbie is a really good solution to this MRN hunting situation and to the GMR situation, particularly on Irish GB flows, and particularly because they've been allowed for the last 3 years to work in a certain way, and that's now got to change. It's a bit like trying to do your driving test again after 10 years of driving. You probably wouldn't pass. So just because everything's been working for the last 3 years, I know there's a lot of Irish hauliers we talked to who are quite worried about the fact that, you know, if there are multiple agents involved, the truck can be delayed. So let's talk about it and see if we can find a way. Land bridge. I didn't know about this one in April, so I put a question mark on it, and the border operating model covered it. Is that if you're land bridging from Ireland to, from EU to Ireland, for example, because I know Ireland, EU's got some relaxations on this. If you're land bridging EU to Ireland, land bridge means you're passing through GB, whether that's England and Wales, for example, maybe even Scotland. You will require at least an IPAFS declaration. There's talk of it also requiring a transit health certificate, but I think that one will balance back a little bit. But you will definitely require an IPAFS declaration, particularly because when you look at that driver messaging, if you're land bridging on a transit and the goods are selected for a border control post, where's the control document in there? It has to be the IPAFS document. So land bridge is going to require, look, it's not onerous. It's not enough to actually say, oh, well, this is now my opportunity to take the Calais-Rosslare route or the Dunkirk-Rosslare route, whichever one it is. It's an, but you must have an IPAFS. It's not particularly onerous document, but it is a new one. Let's have a little bit of a look at the Windsor framework. I'll have a quick sip of water. Just as not a caveat with this, but just as a confirmation, when I speak about the Windsor framework as EORI, I speak as EORI, not TSS. We are part of the TSS consortium, so if you want level detail, granular level detail, then refer to the NICTA site, refer to TSS. We're just giving you our practical view of what it looks like on the ground, because we also have clients that we work with who have those flows into Northern Ireland. Generally speaking, we don't get involved in the paperwork, but we do their Republic of Ireland flows. So therefore, we're duty bound to make sure that we don't leave them in the lurch when it comes to Northern Ireland, and they're up to speed with the latest advice and information. So let's have a quick look at the red lane and green lane. And let's have a look at the customs green lane first. So the customs green lane, there are a number of objectives at this, but the main objective for us is the removal, to remove the need for commodity codes, because the green lane would be for UK internal trade only, and you wouldn't need a commodity code to go from Leeds to Manchester. So the argument is, why would you need one to go from Manchester to Belfast? Quite right. Remove the subdeck requirement. So the entry declaration is there in the background for GBNI flows, but if it's clearly UK internal trade, why do you require a declaration at all? So there are teams of people working on this at the moment. I have to say, when I say there's teams of people working on this at the moment, the customs green lane doesn't officially kick in until October 24. So there's an awful lot of planning work going on in the background. We're involved in a lot of those meetings, but there's a lot of heavyweight knowledge on those meetings. There's 30 plus people, a lot of HMRC policy, a lot of HMRC practicality, and some really, really good ideas coming out to make this the best it can be. But you're not going to see anything really of it until 2024, although you do have to apply for UKIMS, the UK Internal Market Scheme, if you intend to use the green lane. And also, if you're on UKTS today, the UK Trader Scheme, that's finishing at the end of September and been replaced by UKIMS. So if you are on UKTS, apply for UKIMS. If you're not on UKTS, and you've got at least an element of UK internal market movements, apply for UKIMS. If in doubt, apply for UKIMS. So again, don't do nothing. So the Windsor framework wants to remove the pesky commodity code, as we always refer to it, remove the need for the subdeck, and also just move on commercial information rather than customs information. So there's a lot of work been going on with that in the background to try and make sure that's ready for October 24. Watch this space. The other one, the driver as well behind this, pardon the pun, is that whilst the Windsor framework's got benefits for the trader, there must also be benefits for the carrier. The haulier who's carrying those goods across the frontier must also see some form of improvement in the process, if you like, that allows him to move goods from A to B. There's a big argument in that one. Well, not an argument, but there's a big thing to consider. Is if you are carrying goods from GB to NI, you currently don't know what level of the goods you're carrying would qualify for the green lane. I'm saying that quite generally because at the moment, when you create a TSS record, you're not declaring whether they're at risk or not at risk at the frontier stage. I use the word frontier advisedly. You're actually creating a TSS record that allows the goods to move to GB to NI, and then the subdeck is done a week later or whatever, and only at that point are the goods declared as either at risk or not at risk, i.e. kind of red or green. Therefore, you don't know. As the carrier, in a lot of cases, you might think that you're mostly carrying not at risk goods, but you actually don't know. So you've got to start having conversations with your customers and don't assume that just because you delivered it to Northern Ireland, it's not a risk. That's not how it works. So I just happen to know that if you're sitting there now, from a carrier's point of view, you wouldn't really know, and you might find it's a lower number than you think. So it might, whilst you might have originally gone into it thinking 100% of what we carry is not at risk, you might come out thinking finding out it's about 60%, and then you've got to make sure you're ready for red and green lanes, okay? Which can go on the same truck, just to dispel that myth that they can't. Plus, there's also no green lane on the ground. There's no green paint being bought by anybody. It's a virtual lane colour, not a real lane colour. I mean, that's not as stupid as it sounds, actually, because I know that some of the lanes in Eurotunnel are painted orange, and if you follow the orange lane or the green lane or whatever. So I kind of get the question, but it won't be that way. It won't be like that. It's all virtual. And then you've got to decide, as the trader, which lane you intend to use. So if you're not at risk, you need to be on UKIMS. If you're not at risk, you're moving foodstuffs, probably advisable you're on NERMS, which is the Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme. Come back to that one in a minute. And then you would qualify, if you like, in broad terms, for the green lane. If not, you're in the red lane. But the red lane doesn't mean you've got to pay duty on everything. It means you can't have, if you've got products of animal origin, they have to have export health certificates. But when you actually come to do the declaration, the goods might be full rate duty free, so there's no duty to pay anyway, or they might be GB origin moving into NI, they become free under the trade cooperation agreement, because you've got to get into your head that an at-risk entry in Northern Ireland is very similar to a import declaration in the Republic of Ireland. Okay, it's not exactly the same, but it's that kind of methodology into you, so that where you would happily use the trade cooperation agreement preferential duty nil for anything in Dublin, you might be finding you're doing exactly the same thing in Belfast. Okay, and then if there is duty to pay, because you've gone through all the process, and bear in mind, nobody really wants to have duty to pay, but if it's unavoidable through any other process, you can also claim state aid under NI aid, which is a 200,000, I don't know whether it's euros or sterling off the top of my head. I've got a feeling it's sterling, but if you've got a feeling it's euros, but it's a significant figure that you are allowed to claim as part of state aid, where you don't have to pay the duty at all. So there's a lot of mitigating factors to build in there. NERMS is the one I want to just jump on quickly. NERMS is coming into play in October. NERMS replaces the STAMNI. So if you're previously using the STAMNI and private attestations for products of animal origin moving from GB to NI, that finishes at the end of September, and NERMS kicks in. Actually, I'm not sure whether it's right at the finish or whether it's beginning. No, I think it's to the end of September. STAMNI finishes. October, NERMS starts. So if you haven't applied for NERMS, apply for NERMS. If in doubt, apply for NERMS, because you better to apply and have your application bounce back for being not required, rather than sitting there not applying at all. NERMS is kind of the food green lane rather than the customs green lane. So it means you can have a general certificate. It's very much like the private attestation process, but STAMNI comes to an end, NERMS kicks in. You have to register both ends of the transaction. So the GB seller has to be registered and the NI receiver has to be registered. There is a requirement to photograph the seal on arrival in NI. There is a groupage model for that as well, but too complicated to put on this webinar. We'll do that in a separate one. And it also, the qualifying criteria for NERMS is slightly, I would say, more relaxed, slightly more relevant than it was on STAMNI, and therefore some people that wouldn't necessarily have qualified on STAMNI may well qualify now on NERMS. So if in doubt, apply. Just to prove that we're not just a customs agent, there's a labelling requirement, and you will have seen this everywhere, the not for EU label. This is only relevant if you're using NERMS, and you're only using NERMS if the goods would otherwise require an export health certificate. Okay, so if the goods do not require an export health certificate, you're not using NERMs, so you don't need NERMs. And certain products like biscuits, for example, on the whole, and confectionery and things like that, they don't require NERMs, and they don't require an export health certificate. Then therefore they don't require a process to avoid having an export health certificate, which is called NERMs. So it's worth keeping that in mind, because a lot of people are going, oh, we're definitely going to go on NERMs, when they don't even need a health certificate today. I mean, I know not all food requires an export health certificate. And to have somebody saying, well, I'm going to go on NERMs is like an engine producer saying, I'm going to go on NERMs for the carburettor as well. But it's about as relevant, really. If you are using NERMs, from October 2023, you're required to put a not for EU label on the product if it's in the phase 1 process. And I'm going to cover the phase 1 in a minute. So if it's in the list of phase 1 products, you require a label on the product saying not for EU. But only if you're using NERMs, and therefore only if your goods would have otherwise required an export health certificate. So don't start with NERMs, start with, do I need an export health certificate? If your answer to that is no, you don't need NERMs, and you don't need a not for EU label on the product. However, some retailers are actually saying that they would rather have that label. That's commercial rather than process. So you have to have a commercial discussion with the retailer to see whether or not they'll allow you some leeway on that. It's not a requirement. Okay? If you're using NERMs and you're not in the phase 1 not for EU on product requirement, then you still have labels of not for EU at case level, but not at product level. And of course, if you're at product level, you don't need it at case level because it's already on the product. Okay. Just to finish off on labeling, really, because labeling, we did a seminar a while ago, and labeling was 40% of the discussion was on labeling. I mean, there's a lot of food producers in there. So let's just cover the other part of labeling, which is nothing to do with the not for EU piece. But pre-packed food sold in Northern Ireland, must include a Northern Ireland or EU food business operator's address. Okay. If the FBO is not in Northern Ireland or the EU, include the address of the importer based in Northern Ireland or the EU. Okay. So if the goods are moving from GB to NI, they must have on the label must be a Northern Ireland address or an EU address. However, if they've moved via NERMs, because it's kind of confirming that it is UK internal market scheme, or sorry, Northern Ireland retail movement scheme, crikey, too many acronyms, then the label must be the pre-packed goods sold in Northern Ireland that have been moved under the Northern Ireland retail movement scheme from Great Britain. The label must say either a Great Britain address, a Channel Islands address, or a Northern Ireland address. Actually, let me just check that Northern Ireland one. From the 1st of October, pre-packaged food sold in Northern Ireland that have been moved to Northern Ireland from Great Britain through NERMs may instead have a Great Britain, Channel Islands, or Isle of Man address, or an NI address. Let's say that there, but I happen to know it is an NI address as well. So first of all, the not for EU is only phase 1, and only if you're using NERMs, and you're only using NERMs if you would otherwise require an export health certificate. If you're not in the phase 1 list, which I'm going to come to in a minute, you need case level labeling. And then the label for the actual food business operator is dependent upon whether you come in under the food red lane or the food green lane, which is NERMs. Crystal clear. How could you not know how simple that is? Crikey. So what products are in phase 1? Well, meat of bovine animals, fresh, chilled or frozen, swine, fresh, chilled or frozen, the list on the left. There is then a lovely list of HMRC and HMG on DEFRA really on these Excels, and I'm not having a happy time. So there is a list that's available through that little link at the bottom there that allows you to look up what is in phase 1 that therefore requires, if you're using NERMs, a label that says not for EU. And here is an extract of the list on the right hand side. So 83% chicken, fresh or chilled, is phase 1, and the commodity code, which is shown on the left hand side, is wrong. There's always a problem on Excel because a lot of these commodity codes have a leading 0. So somebody in a very helpful way has tried to remove the leading 0 and has killed a couple of other zeros in the process. So the commodity code for 83% chicken, fresh or chilled, as shown on the right hand side, is not 2711, it's 0207. Okay, so be inventive with where you insert the zeros. but generally speaking, the first 0 is missing and the second 0 is missing. It has been reported back up the line, and the new and DEFRA are, or whoever's responsible, are producing a new list. But right now, it's helpful, but it's a real scratch the head, because at the moment, fresh or chilled chicken has the commodity code of chemicals, which it isn't. So just be a bit imaginative with where you insert a couple of zeros there. 2711 is 020711. It will get better. Finishing off on the label piece. You may have seen in the press, it was in the Guardian, I think, the first not for EU labels, and here it is from a certain retailer who uses red quite a bit. However, it's wrong. The reason why it's wrong is that this particular rump steak was born in UK, born in Northern Ireland, reared in Northern Ireland, slaughtered in Northern Ireland, sold in Northern Ireland. It never left Northern Ireland. Therefore, it is in free flow on the island of Ireland and the EU. Maybe with some controls. So to actually say it's not for the EU is a kind of misunderstanding. It's wrong. They got it wrong and they misunderstood the guidance. So if you've seen that all over the press going, the first labels have appeared. Yes, they have, but they're not the right label. So you only need a not for EU label if you would otherwise have had a health certificate. If the animal has been reared in Northern Ireland, born in Northern Ireland, reared in Northern Ireland, slaughtered in Northern Ireland, the product's been processed in Northern Ireland and delivered in Northern Ireland, you would not require an export health certificate. Therefore, you would not require NERMs. Therefore, you don't need a label saying not for EU. So, rule of thumb, product level for phase 1, which is the list, case level for all others, not pallet level. Must be case level. If you want to put a label on a pallet, do that, but it's not acceptable. It must be, you might just need it for reference, or the retailer might want it, but from a process point of view, it's not enough. So it's either product level or case level, only if you're using NERMs. So if the product does not need an export health certificate, you don't need a label on the product or the case. Okay. So always don't start with NERMs or don't start with the green lane, start with, would I otherwise have an export health certificate? And if the answer is no, you don't need any of this, just continue to do what you're doing. So the takeaways, the giveaways, the headlines on this part, on the Windsor framework part, is NERMs. You need to get registered, and you need to register both ends, the GB and the NI end. UKIMS is not ported across. So if you were on UKTS, you've not been automatically ported over to UKIMS. There was a webinar that mentioned that was the case. It's not the case. It was an error. It's been covered off that it was an error. If you're on UKTS, apply for UKIMS. You will not be automatically pushed across. If you're not on UKTS, but you do have an element that's for GBNI flows that you know are not at risk, apply for UKIMS. Yeah. Make sure you update your TSS record. TSS don't get a data feed from HMRC on this because of data protection rules. So if you register on NERMs or you register on UKIMS or any of these things, go into your TSS record and update your TSS record. Otherwise, that will affect the frontier process in that there'll be a validation issue. So apply for NERMs if you need it. My advice will always be, if you're not sure, apply. Apply for UKIMS unless you've already got it, or unless all of your goods are at risk. Update your TSS record and understand your labelling requirements. Just really think about the export health certificate. If the product doesn't require an export health certificate, it doesn't require a label. Okay. Whilst on the subject of labels, oops, gone the wrong way. Whilst on the subject of labels, let's just cover off the UK label, because this was pushed back from October 2022, pushed back to January 2024, but there's so much going on that it might have been missed again. So from January 2024, pre-packed food sold in GB must include a UK address for the food business operator. If the food business operator is not in the UK, include the address of the importer based in the UK. That could also be an agency working on behalf of the importer. Now, this is particularly an issue on consignment stock and DDP movements, where the seller is essentially the importer, also the EU producer becomes the GB importer, either because the goods are moving on a consignment stock basis or because they're on a deliver duty paid basis. In that case, you may not have any permanent business establishment in the UK. We have done this for a while. We provide a brass plate service where we can be the registered contact in the UK for any customer service issues, and because this is pretty much what this is about, really. And we have had that. We've had somebody send us a piece of bacon saying that the rind was too thick on it. So as a customs agent, it's quite an unusual thing when you open the post and there's a slice of bacon in there, but it happens. So you've got to have a UK address. If you don't have a UK address, speak to an agency such as us that are willing to be a brass plate on that process. Come away from that for a minute, come away from labelling. Let's talk about commodity codes and ICS2. ICS2 is the next stage of the Safety and Security Declaration in the EU, which you see, it exists today. It's not a particularly tricky document. It's about to get a little bit trickier. So let's first of all talk about commodity codes. They were big news pre-Brexit, then they kind of went away a little bit, and now they're big news again, and they really are big news now. So start to work on your master data. Make sure you understand what all your products are and what the commodity codes are for those products. You're going to thank me later for that because it's really worth doing. Let's just cover off what's often talked about. I saw an update the other day from somebody talking about HS codes, saying HS codes are 10 digits. No, they're not. They're 6 digits. The HS code is 6 digits and it goes across the World Trade Organization, and you have the 6 digits are pretty much fixed across every country. I think it's 168 members of the World Trade Organization. The first 6 are stuck. They're the ones that we all talk about anywhere in the world. If you're doing an export declaration, you move to 8 digits. So you've got the 6 of the HS code and the 2 local. And there may be some control digits on the back of that, but rare. And if it's import, it's 10 digits. So that you've got the HS code, the local code, and then the control measure codes. Sometimes it's 14 digits on an import if you've actually got a MRC code as well, which is the sugar tax control coding. Well done for keeping up. From the March 24th of March, from March 24, the EU ENS, the Safety and Security Declaration, will require the HS code. That includes all GB exports to EU, and it also includes GB to NI movements. The ENS is the carrier's responsibility. The carrier is normally the haulier. In the situation where it's an unaccompanied vessel or an unaccompanied trailer, normally the ferry company takes on the role of the carrier, but most of the ferry companies have actually changed their T's and C's and said it's not us, basically, it's still the haulier's responsibility. So prepare to capture HS code information. This is going to become more and more important. It kicks in March 24. It's already come into air. It's already come into sea. I think it's already in parcels. ICS2, I mean. And road has been the sort of last one in the piece. Yeah, no, release 3 is maritime, road, and rail. Okay. Yeah, so sorry, I was wrong about maritime. That's coming in ICS2 as well in March 24. However, there is a 200-day implementation window, and we have to know that the Ireland are not going for March 24. It's probably going to be early 25, or certainly end of 24 before they bring it in. GBNI flows through TSS, if you like. That's not going to be March 24. I don't know exactly when it's going to be yet, but it's probably not going to be March 24. And Calais, don't know. Right now, I'd say it's March 24 until we hear otherwise. So suddenly now you've got the requirement for a safety and security declaration at Calais, for example, for GB exports that also requires the commodity code. Now, that can be a challenge if the carrier is not doing any other documentation. So if the exporter is doing his own export deck and somebody else is doing this and somebody else is doing that, now the carrier's got the responsibility to do a declaration, and he's going to need the 6-digit commodity code for each of the products on that load. So you need to consider where the heck you're going to get that information from. I can't tell you where you're going to get it from, but you've got to work out a process of how you're going to capture it. The GB version of the Safety and Security Declaration, which is the ENS, comes in October 2024. Again, it's carrier's responsibility, not the importers. The HS code is optional. Yeah, thank you. So GB doesn't require it. Mandatory fields are not a problem. NCTS 6, which is an improvement to the transit process, will include ENS data in the back end, but it doesn't at the moment. Prior to that, an ENS is required even if it is on transit. And the single trade window is designed to have all of this sort of functionality in the back end. Whether that be ready for October 24, it's a tall order, but so was TSS, and we got there with TSS. So let's see. For the GB one, because it's a new thing from October 24, and it's not as rigid as ICS2, if you like, where you got the HS code. You just don't need, that's one of the hardest parts of it, and you don't need it. But just be mindful of the fact that the importer might do his own declaration, the exporter might do his own declaration. Now, as an agent, you need to gather some data that allows you to do an ENS that you might not otherwise have gathered. So you need to work out where's the data going to come from, and then who, if anybody, is going to pay for the ENS to be done. The data requirements have actually simplified even more. So on the left-hand side, there are the actual mandatory fields, and there's only 20 of them, and there's nothing particularly shocking in there. You can't, because you've got no commodity code, the goods description can be a little bit more broad, should we say? So you wouldn't necessarily have multiple items unless you've got really unusual goods. And then you've got optional fields, which are optional. So from day one, I wouldn't do them, because the number one rule with customs documentation is only put what you need to put, because you're just giving them something to look at otherwise. So if you're happy to do the optional fields, knock yourself out. But the recommendation would be just don't start with them. Maybe do them later on. So the mandatory elements are pretty straightforward. Optional is optional. There's no need for the HS code, even though ICS2 is coming in, because we're on a different platform to that. An ENS shouldn't create a blocking problem in any way, shape or form. Decide will do it and then get it done. A lot of agents, us included, will provide an ODMD, a sort of one data multiple deck service. We do that already today, where we get a data feed from one source and we do a GB export. We do an import deck, an ENS, a PPN, a GMR, an IPAS declaration, all from one data source, and some master data held on file. Kind of what some people might lovingly call a single trade window. Like agents have been working that way since day one, really. So have a think about who's going to pay for the ENS. You might have to use an agency to do it, who's got access to the documentation. I want to throw this one in because we talk about this one quite a lot, and because it annoys me more than anything, is that inventory linking is fabulous when you've got containers, inanimate objects that don't have a driver that can make them go anywhere. So containers, unaccompanied trailers, that kind of thing, inventory link is really vital part of the port process. When it comes to Ro-Ro, if there is a GVMS option, use the GVMS option because it's faster, it's cheaper. However, there is a slight pressure in that it's a departure model rather than the inventory linking is an arrival model. So if you need the 12 hours of the sailing in order to process the customs documentation, then inventory linking is your solution. And we have some clients who do that, and that's absolutely fine. If you don't need the 12 hours of crossing the sea to get to GB, then use the departure model, which is GVMS, and save yourself a fortune. What we find at the moment is that we see a lot of movements that would qualify for GVMS. The port has GVMS, the paperwork's all streamlined, but the carrier has decided, I don't know why, probably through force of habit, to use inventory linking. Now, the way inventory linking often works is that the charges come to the badge holder. It's a bit like having an iPhone and you swipe stuff and it goes on your Apple account. Well, it's the same type of thing with inventory linking, is that the badge holder often gets all of the port charges. And there can be quite a lot. You know, there's container inspection, common usage charge, there's a port exam, port security, infrastructure charge. I think there's somebody in the dark room coming up with some of these. Port fuel duty, energy transition, port development fee, fuel surcharge, energy adjustment levy, X-ray, blah, 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 blah. So there's a number of elements that can come into force. And those charges, because they go to the badge holder, who's often operating on behalf of the importer, end up with the importer. So the customs agent ends up saying customs clearance, £45, whatever it is, and £80 worth of port charges. Why? There was a GVMS option at that port, but the haulier has decided to go through the inventory. So if the haulier has decided to go through the inventory, the haulier can pay for going through the inventory. The way we handle it, because we use simplification, is that we do the import release as entry in declarants records, or in most cases for non-controlled goods. And then we do the inventory release on a C21, and the port charges are now separated. So the importer does not have to pay the port charges just because that's the way it always used to be. So if you are paying port charges at the moment, let's have a look at it, let's audit it, and let's see if there's a better way of doing it. One is not just by turning back to your agent and going, I'm not paying that, but actually saying, look, these can be avoided, guys. GVMS in most cases is free. So if your haulier decides to go through a port that has a GVMS option and an inventory linked option, and he's chosen to spend your money by going inventory linking when there is no discernible benefit of doing that, don't pay for it. There you go, a bit contentious. We're nearly there. You've done well. I suppose, unless you paused it 1,000 times, in which case you've still done well. We see this a lot. Brexit is not working. I see this right now. I was at the proms the other day. Everyone's waving EU flags. Anyway, this is what I want to do. We're giving it away for free outside, but whatever. Brexit's not working. Of course it's not. It's a journey, not a destination. Brexit, you can't just flick a switch and go, that's it then, Brexit's done. When Boris said Brexit's done, it's that we've started the journey. But it is a journey. Brexit's not a destination. You never, ever arrive. I mean, the holy grail for Brexit is the trade deal with the States. It's always going to be that. I mean, that due to for various reasons, that's not imminent, but that's the holy grail. That's what the world. That's what the UK's view of this is, that we are able to negotiate our own trade deals. So the American one is all, of course. I mean, you'd have to be living under a rock if you didn't know that the UK wanted to do a trade deal with the States at some stage. Other trade deals are now ramping up, focused on the Commonwealth. So there's now an Australasia deal, which has duty-free pref nil on all of the tariff chapters there that are coloured in green. For the others, there's tariff quotas that sort of limit the flow but don't necessarily charge the same amount of duty unless the quota is exhausted. But I recognise Canberra is a little bit further than Calais. I get it. I completely get it. But equally, Canberra exists, and so does Chicago exist. And there was a point when we just weren't getting access to those markets. So I get that too. There are arguments in all ways. But for the UK to have to be masters of their own destiny in terms of trade deals is a big step forward, and one we should encourage. It's part of the journey, not the destination. The other one is the change of GSP is now there's DCTS, the Developing Countries Trading Scheme. And the new scheme improves the market access for the 47 GSP countries, plus 18 additional countries that were not part of the general system of preferences before. And these are GSP or DCTS. These are unilateral trade deals. So it's not a case of if you buy my car, I'll buy your onions, that type of thing. This is just, we'll buy your cars. I mean, they don't generally make cars in GSP countries, but we'll buy your onions, let's say. And there's no reciprocal deal about it. We're just supporting and developing trade in developing countries. Because a good move, it's a very good move by the UK to do that. Just be aware of direct transport rules in a similar way that if the goods come in under a GSP certificate or GSP standard certificate and are customs cleared in, say, Belgium, and then move from Belgium to the UK, they've lost their GSP status and they become dutiable. We've seen this quite a bit. There is a direct transport rule. So if the goods came from Myanmar, let's say, directly to GB, there would be no duty under GSP or DCTS. If they come, but then if they wanted to go to Belgium, they'd be dutiable because from GB to Belgium, the preference has been broken. If likewise the goods come out of Myanmar and come into Belgium and were customs cleared in Belgium, the DSP has been killed, and now when they come to the UK, they're dutiable because there's no preference certificate because it was exhausted by the first customs process. So just be careful of direct transport rules. One of the absolutely best ways to actually get the best out of the direct transport rules is take the goods to Northern Ireland and customs clear them in Northern Ireland, because then you get access to all of the markets off the one preference document. Just saying. So what's the headlines on the bomb, if you like, and everything, or the process, really, the GB process outside of NI? One, use custom simplifications. Just ask yourself why you don't use them. And if you don't use them, give yourself a really good reason why you don't use them. Prepare for SPS controls, but really try and work out whether your product is medium or low. Get as many people involved in that process as you can. I can't tell you whether your product is medium or low. You need that official, the official response, a bit like a sort of binding tariff agreement. It's kind of, I need to know if that's low, nothing's changing really. If it's medium, lots and lots of things changing. Consider having your own border control post if your goods are classified as medium. Get ready for IE to GB. That hasn't, as I say, that hasn't existed, and it will exist now, including, and there will now also be SPS controls. Comms to drivers, fine. Look, they work pretty well through the GMR. They don't work very well on transit, so we've got to think about how to do that. I don't like the iPaths messaging idea because I don't think it's going to go to the right person. There will be a process in there where you can actually put the driver's mobile number for them to be identified. I still don't like it. It's woolly. Challenge port charges on Ro-Ro. Like if the port is a hybrid that has GVMS and inventory, don't just accept that you have to pay the port charges. UK food labelling must have a UK address. Plan for the ENS creation, the Safety and Security Declaration. Look, it just needs to be done. At least there's no HS codes from day one. And get a DDA. The DDA, the duty deferment account, whether or not you pay duty or not, it kind of doesn't matter. The DDA is an enabler. Like the approvals that we have, they're underwritten by the duty deferment account. And the best way to describe that is like swiping your credit card at the check-in at the hotel in case you drink the contents of the minibar. If you don't drink the contents of the minibar, nothing happens and your card is never debited. But I had the card. I couldn't have checked into the hotel without it. The DDA is like that. It's an enabler. And because it's free of charge up to £10,000 a month, sorry, I'll jump to that slide, get one. The resistance we get at the moment is we use the agent's DDA. Fine, get that a lot. We use a CDS cash account. Fine. But also let's look at your own deferment account. So on the first one, we use the agent's DDA. And that often requires payment before release. Fine, so you're creating friction where there didn't need to be friction. Normally incurs a fee, a percentage of the amount advanced and an admin fee, 2.5%, let's say, and 15 quid or whatever. Creates friction on the cross-border process that didn't need to be there. It was one of our early advice when we were looking there, when we were planning for Brexit, was don't go looking for borders. And most people didn't. But equally, don't go looking for friction when there's many ways of avoiding that friction. CDS cash account. This is a fairly new thing with now the imports on CDS. Is we don't have much or any, so whenever we use it, we just top up our cash account when needed, and we often load a bit too much just in case it's the wrong amount. Why? Why do you have it? Because you can have a CDS cash account by clicking your fingers, really. You don't need any guarantees and you just need to fill in a form. You can have your own deferment account pretty much the same way. Not quite clicking your fingers, there's a bit of a harder form to do. But you don't need a bank guarantee up to £10,000 credit a month with HMRC. So you don't need a cash account, don't need to use the agent's DDA, and you don't have to pay HMRC until the 15th of next month. And you only pay what you spent rather than topping up too much just in case. And it avoids fees. It avoids additional border process, therefore it avoids additional risk at the frontier. Why wouldn't you? There's a lot of this presentation is why wouldn't you? Rather than like, it might be nice to know. Just rack them up, get the account. I mean, are you still using a pay-as-you-go mobile phone? Of course you're not. Well, if you are, I apologise. You've got an account, it's more flexibility. Last slide, thank you, then I'm out of here. So where do we come in? What do we do? Well, Cabbie gives you access to maximum simplification and minimum cost. So it's free to install. Well, you don't install it, it's in the cloud. So it's free access. You register once, you upload transactions. It takes a minute every time you upload a transaction. You can authorize your freight carrier to upload the transaction on your behalf. You can either authorize your supplier to upload the transaction on your behalf. The main thing is everything flows, paperwork gets done 5 days after the border crossing. Supply chain is unaffected. The GB ENS Safety and Security Declaration, we can do that. There's lots of agents that can do that. We've been doing them in Europe from day one, and we can certainly do them in GB when that comes about. So if you need any help with that, we're there for you. We can brass plate the food business operator UK address for DDP or consignment stock. Talk to us about that. We do that already. Data management is so much of this is about master data now. Master data is becoming more and more and more important, particularly as single trade window comes along. This kind of idea that you've got this base data of what your flows are, you would require that as soon as as soon as trusted trader programs become more solidified. The number one is what products do you have? So start building that master data. Make sure you got it. We can handle customs approvals, advice and support. That's what you expect to do. We're customs agents, but a lot of the approvals we do for nothing. If you sign up to use our services, we actually get you approved so that we're not locking you into our services. So if we've got custom simplifications, for example, that we are using to move your goods through the frontier, we'll make sure you get approval for those simplifications as well. I'm not saying you need to use them, but it's a comfort level for you as that if you change your process into using those simplifications, I don't want you to feel locked in with us at any stage. So we'll actually help you get your own approvals, normally free of charge. And let's have a look at inventory link pricing. There's a better way of doing this. Look, I'm not saying avoid inventory in all cases, but just because you're the importer doesn't mean you have to pay for choices made by your carrier. You still can if you want to, but at least you've got the option. And once it's in PDF format, you'll be able to download this from our website. We'll sort of obviously strip out all the animations and what have you and just put it as a PDF, but it will be available this week or within the next few days. And when I'm saying this week, the date today is Sunday, the 10th of September. Working at home, boiling hot, so I've got to close all the doors so you can't hear the dogs barking. But that's it. Thank you for listening. Hope I've not lost my mojo. It's been a long time since I've done one of these. Clearly, I've not lost the ability to talk forever because I've hit about an hour and a half again. But at least it's on a video and you can watch it at your leisure. So thank you for popping along. I'm now going to try and work out how the heck I disconnect. I think it's over here. When I can find the mouse would be another good thing to do. So I told you it would be messy at the end. Let me just see here. I'm going to kill off the recording. So thank you again. See you next time.